Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East. Welcome. The Palestinian Foreign Minister, Nabil Shah, announced that the new Palestinian government will immediately try to reach a ceasefire agreement with Israel. In a speech in Madrid to the Palestinian ambassadors to European nations, Shah said that once Ahmed Kari's government is established, they will negotiate with Israel to reach a permanent ceasefire, indicating that the new Palestinian government will be declared soon. Meanwhile, Rafiq al-Natsha, the new parliament speaker of the Palestinian Legislative Council, outlined the priorities of the council, which he says are to end the Israeli occupation and reduce the suffering of the Palestinian people, indicating that all government institutions will work to fight the occupation. Most European citizens believe that Israel represents the greatest threat to world peace, even more than Iran, North Korea, and the United States, who all tied for third place. In the opinion poll, which was officially announced today, 59% perceive Israel as a threat to world peace, and Israel condemned these results even before they were officially announced. 53% view Iran, North Korea, and the United States as threats to world peace, and 52% of Europeans believe that Iraq is the greatest threat to world peace. The President of the European Union said that he was surprised by the results of the survey, viewing Israel as the biggest threat to world peace, and he confirmed that the results do not change the EU's position. Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin and Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon held talks today in Moscow regarding the peace process and Russian-Iranian nuclear cooperation, in addition to strengthening trade relations. Sharon said that he is prepared to make compromises for a settlement with the Palestinians. Meanwhile, Putin said that his country will work to stop the violence and bloodshed between the Israelis and Palestinians. The new head of the Palestinian Legislative Council, Rafiq Natsha, listed the council's priorities, which are ending the Israeli occupation and reducing the suffering of the Palestinians. Internally, Natsha said that he will focus on monitoring the Executive Council's work. Meanwhile, appointed Prime Minister Ahmed Kari is rushing to form a cabinet in order to fill the political gap caused by delaying its creation. Rafiq al-Natsha has now taken the seat of the parliament speaker after being elected to the position left vacant by appointed Prime Minister Ahmed Kari. He is now defining the working relationship between the legislative and executive councils. Al-Natsha received 53 votes out of 70. His rival, Barhan Jarar, received 10 votes, while 7 abstained. Al-Natsha's first priorities will be to develop the legislative council through monitoring the executive council, also to fight corruption and steer away from any negotiations with Israel, in contrast to his predecessor Abu Allah, who handed over his position to al-Natsha before the end of the council's session.
Everyone agrees that there should be reforms and that we should fight corruption. I personally will set priorities in that direction, in addition to enforcing the law, democracy, and the legislation, by making sure the executive committee is implementing them.
The Fatah cluster in the Legislative Council agreed on endorsing al-Natsha as the only candidate to represent the movement. However, Fatah deputy Barhan Jarar ran for this position. Why not? Whoever is elected to this position is the third most important figure in the Palestinian Authority and may serve as acting president if the president dies or is absent.
One of the brothers was nominated and another Fatah member ran against him. So it can be a truly democratic process within the Legislative Council. Fatah members do not want to appear as if they are just receiving orders.
The dispute between President Arafat and appointed Prime Minister Abu Ala concerning the position of Minister of Interior has yet to be resolved. Will it be General Nasser Youssef or someone else? Nevertheless, the new speaker may engage in arguments with the deputies concerning the legal deadline for the Prime Minister to declare his new government to the Council, especially since the 30-day term of the caretaker government is about to expire.
All the Palestinians would like to see the new Palestinian cabinet formed as soon as possible and to see the Palestinian political situation stabilized. Abu Ala has been assigned to forming the new government for a long time, and I think the issue is final.
Ever since his election, the new parliament speaker has been focusing his duties on monitoring the Executive Council, refusing to participate in any negotiations, in contrast to previous practices. Majid Saeed, Abu Dhabi Television, Ramallah.
One Iraqi civilian died and 15 others were wounded Monday in an explosion targeting Aqil Hamid, the deputy governor of the Maaskar Saad region. Another Iraqi civilian was killed and 8 others were injured Sunday when 6 mortars fell on residential sectors near U.S. Army Forces compounds in the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk. Meanwhile, about 30 mortars and explosives were found near Azaim Elementary School east of Baghdad. The headmaster of the school said that a young boy had told him about the cache, and the site was later visited by Iraqi Interior and Undersecretary Ahmed Khadim. A U.S. Central Command spokesman said Monday 16 U.S. soldiers were killed and 20 others wounded in the shooting down of a U.S. military helicopter west of Baghdad on Sunday. U.S. forces had previously put the number of dead at 15. And while American troops were removing by truck the wreckage of the downed trooper, anger and confusion mounted in Washington, with U.S. officials unable to determine the side behind anti-U.S. occupation attacks.
It was the deadliest day for American occupation forces since the occupation of Iraq. 15 U.S. soldiers were killed and 21 others were injured Sunday when their Chinook helicopter was shot down by a surface-to-air missile over the flashpoint town of Fallujah while on its way to Baghdad airport. Some injuries were reported severe and were taken to the Ramstein Air Base in Germany to be later transferred to the nearby Landstuhl Medical Center for treatment. The attack, the second of its kind, after shooting down a similar helicopter over Mosul last month, came 3 days after U.S. consular officials in occupied Iraq warned against a day of resistance. That day was said to be a rumor, however, it turned disastrous for the U.S. occupation.
It was a terrible day. In war, there are going to be terrible days, and unfortunately, it's necessary to work our way through these things, and ultimately, we're going to prevail. The President understands the importance of what's being done. Fortunately, the young men and women serving there understand how important their work is, and we will help the Iraqi people win their country and take over their security.
The use of sophisticated weapons and anti-U.S. attacks limited the movement of ground and airborne troops. U.S. helicopters must now reconsider flying at low altitudes, while highly alerted ground forces are looking for alternative roads for their movement, particularly in Fallujah. High alert among occupation soldiers was visible after leaflets attributed to Saddam Hussein warned of coming days of resistance and called for a general strike in Iraq, thus warning U.S.-led forces of more attacks, maybe through more developed means and weaponry. Statements by U.S. officials showed they were confused as to those behind this rise in attacks and on how to deal with this situation. Some blamed Saddam Hussein loyalists, others blamed Al-Qaeda members allegedly infiltrating from Syria, and others even went further by blaming Saddam's deceased sons, Uday and Qusay.
It's absolutely horrible, and it's just so frustrating to know it's just going to happen more.
Jubilant Iraqis were celebrating another roadside bomb attack on a U.S. Army convoy also in Fallujah. The U.S. military command confirmed the death of 2 American contractors working for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineering, adding that 1 soldier was injured. Another occupation soldier was killed in another bomb attack in Baghdad, raising to 138 the number of U.S. occupation troops killed since major combat was declared over on May 1st. Casualties by this number no doubt shock American troops already losing their morals. Now helicopters pilots joined ground forces in expecting the worst during their flights.
In Afghanistan, a long-awaited post-Taliban draft constitution was officially presented to Afghani President Hamid Karzai. This came as a delegation of UN Security Council envoys was on the second day of a visit to the war-shattered country to show support for Karzai.
At the ceremony at the Presidential Palace in Kabul, Afghanistan's first post-Taliban constitution draft was presented to President Hamid Karzai. Former King Zahir Shah and foreign diplomats were also presented with a copy of the 12-chapter 160-article document by the state-run Constitutional Commission. According to a statement distributed at the ceremony, the draft constitution is based on Islamic principles and recognizes that no law can be contrary to the sacred religion of Islam. However, there was no mention by the Commission of whether Islamic Sharia law was included in the draft, which further stressed the enshrinement of the freedom of other religions. The Commission said the draft constitution aims at providing a basis for unity throughout Afghanistan, recognized as one single and united state which belongs to all its people. The draft constitution will be voted on next month in Kabul by Afghanistan's traditional Grand Assembly, known as Loya Jirga, of 500 delegates. Monday's long-awaited move came a day after the international community tried to shed aside criticism that the U.S. ex-war target has been forgotten. Amid high security, a high-level UN Security Council delegation arrived Sunday in Afghanistan and promptly expressed its support to Karzai's efforts to draw up the draft constitution and to ensure security for elections. The mission, headed by Germany's ambassador to the United Nations, met Sunday Afghani presidents, vice presidents, foreign minister and defense minister. On Monday, the 15-member team of ambassadors and deputy ambassadors headed to western Afghanistan's Herat province and met Western strongmen and Herat governor Ismail Khan and officials from the Independent Human Rights Commission. The UN delegation intended to put pressure on factional and provincial leaders to cooperate fully with the central government, particularly in ensuring the necessary security.
Afghanistan is high on the agenda of the Security Council, and that the Security Council and the international community supports the reconstruction process in Afghanistan. Ich glaube, das größte Problem ist die Sicherheit.
The biggest problem is security. Without security, it won't be possible to prepare the elections so that they can take place in June. And without security, of course, political and economic reconstruction is difficult. Therefore, our biggest concern is the implementation of security to put into place the bond process.
The visit comes on the heels of a new UN report that noted worrying signs of weakening support for the government outside the capital. More than 350 people have been killed in violence across their country since early August, making it the bloodiest period since the Taliban's collapse. The Security Council has passed a resolution allowing international NATO-led peacekeepers to widen their operations outside the capital, although participating countries may be reluctant to commit more troops to the region. Besides security, Afghans fear they are being forgotten as Western donors' pledges are being woefully short of their need, and much of the money promised since the Taliban regime was ousted late in 2001 has yet to arrive.
A teenage Palestinian activist who was being hunted by Israeli security services blew himself up near the northern West Bank town of Qalqaliya on Monday. Sources said that no one else was injured in the explosion in the village of Azun. A Palestinian security source said that Israeli soldiers had entered the village in jeeps and imposed a curfew shortly before the incident. The Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades claimed responsibility for the foiled operation. Israeli and Palestinian leaders edged Monday toward a resumption of top-level contacts as Hamas movement raised the possibility of a halt to operations against Israeli civilians. A senior official traveling with Ariel Sharon in Moscow said that the Israeli Prime Minister may meet his Palestinian counterpart, Ahmed Quria, within days. Palestinian sources said that Finance Minister Salem Fayyad had met with Israel's Defense Minister Shaul Mufaz late last week without giving details. Mufaz, for his part, confirmed that there have been meetings but did not reveal their content. Israel officially severed contacts with the Palestinians after a massive suicide bus bomb in Jerusalem on August 19, but there have been increasing signs of a thaw in relations as the Palestinian premier prepares to unveil an enlarged government later this week. Fighting between Afghan fighters in northern Afghanistan continued for a third day after at least 7 people, including 2 civilians, were killed at the weekend. A British military spokesman said local leaders and elders had so far failed to enforce a ceasefire in the Koshanat district of Saripur province. The spokesman added that fighting was linked to a personal issue between 2 fighting groups rather than a major dispute between the 2 factions, which regularly engage in violent regional power struggles. The latest clash comes as a United Nations Security Council mission was touring Afghanistan to show support to the government of President Hamid Karzai, who is struggling to exert control over fighting groups. Spain closed its border with Gibraltar on Monday after a virus-stricken luxury cruise ship docked in the tiny British colony, sparking a furious diplomatic row with London. British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw condemned as unnecessary and disappropriate Spain's decision, which has raised tensions over the territory that has been at the center of a centuries-old tussle between Madrid and London. Cars and pedestrians queued up on the Spanish side of the border, made up mainly of several thousand Spanish workers who cross daily into Gibraltar for work. The British cruise ship Aurora, on a trip around the Mediterranean, sailed to Gibraltar when Greek authorities refused to allow it to dock on Friday after about 500 passengers came down with a severe stomach bug. Flash floods swept through one of Indonesia's biggest national parks early Monday, killing at least 67 people and leaving hundreds more missing. Officials and rescue workers said floods swept through the Gunung Gluser National Park on Sumatra Island just after midnight, following days of torrential rains. By late afternoon on Monday, rescue crews said 67 bodies had been recovered, most of them Indonesians. Officials said heavy rains on Sunday night had swollen the Bahurok River, which broke its banks, sweeping away dozens of wooden and concrete guest houses that cater mostly to backpackers and local tourists.
At the invitation of the Syrian Arab Republic, the 4 ministers of the countries neighboring Iraq opened their meetings in Damascus today. More in this report.
The meeting started with the participation of Foreign Minister Farouk al-Shara and the Foreign Ministers of Saudi Arabia, Prince Saud al-Faisal, Jordan, Dr. Marwan al-Muashir, Iran, Dr. Kamal Kharazi, Egypt, Mr. Ahmed Maher, Turkey, Mr. Abdullah Gul, and Kuwait, Sheikh Mohammed Salim al-Sabah, to study the current situation in Iraq and its repercussions on the Arab, regional and international arenas. The ministers had extended an invitation to the Iraqi Transitional Government's foreign minister to attend the meetings, yet the conferees did not receive any reply. They expressed hope that a representative of Iraq would attend their forthcoming meetings. The ministers reviewed their previous meetings held in Istanbul on January 23, 2003, in Riyadh on April 18, 2003, and in Tehran on May 28, 2003. They discussed the current situation in Iraq out of their commitment to Iraq's unity, independence, and sovereignty over its land and national resources. The ministers expressed their full sympathy and solidarity with the Iraqi people in the crisis they are suffering from because of the dangerous deterioration of the security, economic, and living situation. They emphasized their rejection of any measure that would lead to partitioning Iraq, affirming their respect for Iraq's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, and their commitment to non-intervention in Iraq's internal affairs, calling the other sides to follow the same policy. They affirmed the Iraqi people's right to determine their own political future underlining the need of the UN to play a vital role in Iraq, particularly to supervise the formulation of the constitution, the holding of elections, and the laying down of a timetable to end occupation and precipitate the transfer of authority to the Iraqis in a manner that enables the Iraqi people to recover their rights and sovereignty over their lands. The ministers of the countries neighboring Iraq also underlined support for the Transitional Ruling Council's efforts to shoulder its transitional responsibilities until the election of an Iraqi government that represents all and meets the Iraqi people's aspirations and interests and guarantees equality to all the unified Iraqi people. Emphasis was laid on the responsibilities of the occupation authority according to relevant UN Security Council resolutions, particularly the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949, regarding the responsibilities of occupation forces in safeguarding security and stability in Iraq. They rejected any accusation leveled against their countries of intervening in Iraq's internal affairs. They denounced the terrorist explosions against civilians and human and religious institutions, as well as against international organizations and diplomatic missions working in Iraq, stressing the need of finding out their perpetrators and holding them responsible for their crimes. They called the responsible Iraqi authorities to cooperate with their own governments to remove the danger threatening the security of the neighboring countries and prevent any infiltration into their borders. They called their UN representatives to work collectively to follow up the UN role in Iraq. They thanked Syria for this invitation and expressed appreciation for their meeting with President Bashar al-Assad and his views, voicing solidarity with Syria regarding Israel's exploitation of the developments in the region to launch an aggression against the Syrian lands. The ministers decided to hold subsequent meetings until Iraq recovers its sovereignty and independence. They also welcomed Kuwait's invitation to host the forthcoming meeting. Mr. Al-Shara then answered questions put by news media men.
The downing of the U.S. Chinook helicopter raises new questions concerning Bush's strategy in Iraq, especially when the opposition within America is now describing his policy in Iraq as adventurous. Meanwhile, military personnel from the Pentagon are warning about the danger of the developing resistance attacks against U.S. forces.
An American helicopter was down on November 2nd in Iraq, killing 16 of its passengers. This may mark a new trend in the American strategy in Iraq.
Have died and been killed.
Many have died. It's a sad day for America. We will encounter tragic days like this one in this long and difficult war. It is complicated, but necessary.
According to U.S. sources, about 114 U.S. soldiers were killed in the first 40 days of the war. Since the beginning of May, more than 120 soldiers were killed. However, unofficial sources say that hundreds were killed. Some people are comparing this bitter reality facing the United States forces in Iraq to the Vietnam crisis. The situation in Iraq is actually more tragic, especially when one considers the U.S. political strategy and the amount of military power it has used in the region. Criticism against Bush's policy is not confined to the international level. In America, criticism is also increasing. Some are now describing the United States' presence in Iraq as Bush's adventure, reflecting the decline in his popularity despite his denial. The United States is also asking for help from the European countries who originally were opposed to the war. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is warning about the danger and difficulty of the situation as resistance fighters are strategizing their attacks. They started with direct confrontations, explosives, and now they are downing planes. That is the situation of the United States forces in Iraq. The French foreign minister expressed sadness about the death of U.S. soldiers aboard the Chinook helicopter in Iraq, while Britain accused Arab fundamentalists of being responsible for these attacks. The question is, when will the U.S. hand over the authority of Iraq to the Iraqis?
The downing of a U.S. helicopter as it was returning from northern Iraq, where the soldiers were vacationing, is a new factor behind the deteriorating morale among these forces.
There is no doubt that the downing of the helicopter in Baghdad will further increase frustration among U.S. soldiers who are being attacked by unknown resistance fighters. This helicopter served as a transport for soldiers from the center and south to the Waqt base, the safe city where U.S. soldiers spend their vacations. It appears that this convenient and fast transporting method will not be used anymore if it continues to be targeted, like what took place at Baghdad's international airport. The Waqt airport receives many military planes full with soldiers who spend their vacations at the Hyatt Hotel. The U.S. soldiers go to the city streets to interact with the population who like to take pictures with them. These soldiers are viewed as occupiers in the center and the south of Iraq, but in the north they are viewed as liberators. The downing of this plane must have deteriorated the morale of the U.S. soldiers who desperately wait for their vacations so they can spend some time away from the attackers who have been attacking them day and night.
An Iraqi pipeline was engulfed in fire near Samarra city in northern Baghdad. The local population said that the pipeline in Tartar city that was engulfed in flames is about 85 kilometers north of Baghdad. The fire was caused by an explosion on Saturday night, and smoke covered the sky in the area. The pipeline transferred oil from Tikrit in Beja city in the north to the Durra refinery in Baghdad. Foreign ministers of Iraq's neighboring countries met in Damascus and called on giving the UN a central role in Iraq, and they expressed their worries about the deteriorating situation there.
This is the fourth meeting of its kind, focusing on what is taking place in Iraq. This time, foreign ministers from Egypt and Iraq, neighboring countries, met in Damascus.
We are hoping to help our Iraqi brothers regain their complete sovereignty.
At the end of the meeting, they made an announcement confirming the unity of the Iraqi territories. They also discussed the importance of making a timetable for ending the occupation, as well as giving the United Nations a central role there.
We are calling for elections and setting a timetable to end the occupation. We also call for the quick transfer of authority to the Iraqis.
The Iraqi foreign minister was absent from the Damascus meeting. The invitation was late, although the participants wanted Iraq to be present during their meeting.
The timing of this invitation did not suit the dignity of Iraq.
Minister Zubari said that Iraq is not concerned with the meeting results. These countries are influenced in several ways, which explains why they are determined to continue their discussions at a later date in Kuwait, reflecting their continued concern about what is happening in Iraq.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.